Hello and welcome to another episode of the Bitcoin News Show right here on the World Crypto Network. Thanks so much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. We have an amazing show for you guys today, as usual, talking Bitcoin on another Sunday as our ritual seems to go here. I have a special kind of one-on-one interview today. I'd like to talk to a person by the name of Andrew DeSantis, who is a security researcher, Bitcoin enthusiast. He's been in Bitcoin for a long time. And I want to kind of get his thoughts on a bunch of different things of the goings on of Bitcoin. And so I think we can kind of just jump right into it. And let me just say, Andrew, I just want to say, thank you so much for your work that you have done in Bitcoin in the past. With you helped with Bitcoin Magazine, and then even Bitcoin.team is an amazing website for people to go to check out to see who actually programmed what on Bitcoin. And I know you have a lot of other projects, but I just want to thank you for your time in the space, because as a person who has been seeking truth his whole life, right? I tried to find truth in religion. Nope. Tried to find truth in government. Nope. Tried to find truth in history. Nope. But I kind of see the light in you, Andrew. I see that you try to get the truth out there. You try to get the light out there, and even your profile, I think, says where the light is. So good. It's really good to have you back on the show, Andrew. It's been a while now. We've had you on the program a couple times now, and each time is very, very interesting. And so I'm going to try to follow along with you as best as I can, Andrew. But I do have a lot of questions for you. So first, let me just say hi again and introduce you and let you say hello.
Hey, it's always good to be here. It's always after something happens and some people get confused, and then we hang out. So it's always fun. I never plan what I'm gonna say, I guess, when I talk to you, because I just it's always slow at the beginning. I don't know what to say because I haven't thought of what to say. And then whenever you ask me questions, I just will answer it unfiltered and then see what people think, I guess.
Absolutely. And that's what this show is all about, is getting the truth out there, is being unfiltered, is not reading from a teleprompter. That's kind of what I really try to pride, this show on, is just kind of giving people our raw, honest opinion. So just thanks again so much for joining us, Andrew. I think we can get right into it now. I do have some questions. So first, let me just let's kind of start out nice and easy and just kind of maybe get your general thoughts on the price of Bitcoin right now, how it's going. Do you think it's where it's supposed to be right now? Did you expect it to be lower or higher? And maybe what are your outlooks for the next, through to the end of the year?
I have not looked at the price since January.
Oh, really? Well, that's
no idea.
You are a much better man than I am, than Andrew, because I tried to not look at it, and then every single time, I hear that noise in my head, and I'm like, what is the price? It's a really good, or a relatively good way to kind of gauge what the sentiment is, in the crypto space. So if it's crashing, then everybody's everybody's sad and in tears, right? And if it's going up, everybody's talking about how crypto is going to change the world.
So in January, I bought a house, and I'm about to have a baby in a couple months. But
wow.
in January,
congratulations, sir.
Thanks. In January, that would be a lot of feelings and signs of what I saw was coming. I stopped seeing the market as being. I saw a lot of market logic in December. I made a lot of money in December, and I don't trade. I was just sitting there looking around at what people were doing and looking at the market in general. And I made a couple moves, and it made a lot of money, and I knew exactly why it made a lot of money. And I knew in January that there was no more sense behind why people were moving money and why people were doing stuff. And so I decided to buy a house so that I could get back to work. And so price wise,
well, real quick,
I don't know
noticed
why the price would be anything.
Well, I noticed that you're not in your bunker there, because you famously were, kind of in your the bunker looking situation in the last couple episodes. You looked like you were in a wooden bunker trying to stay away from the bad guys. So it's nice to see you in a house, and nice to see you. Sounds like you're going to have a child, so that's awesome. Bringing a mini Andrew DeSantis into the world cannot be nothing but a net positive.
Thanks, my man. Yeah, no, I mean, I was extremely focused and on long-term stuff, and getting what in my mind was a milestone that I had to get done in terms of work. And as the milestone started to pick up, as the milestone started to be approached, the Bitcoin price started to go up. And maybe October, November, December, January were very fast, very quick, very instinctive thoughts, like everything. Like I'll go back to things that I thought back then and like go through threads that I just had that were raw, and I'll read through the information. I'll be like, whoa, that's like very vivid and very specific, and that makes a lot of sense. And like, guy's pretty smart. I'm like, wait a second, that's not me. The way I see things is it's an output from any individual at any given moment in time is produced by context and by the feedback loop that they're interacting with. And so certain points in time, like when the price is rising and you know that to get from A to B, let's say October is point A, B is November. A to B, there was a logical series of events that led to that price rise. And then people continuing to understand the situation in November allows another price rise to happen from November to December. And as quickly as you can produce out something that makes sense, like actually explain why things are happening as it's going all the way up, then it'll bring in more people that are going to question why is it continuing to go up until it reaches its peak. And that's when there's no reason for it to continue going up. No one knows what the heck is going on. It's gone like completely parabolic. And then that's when you know it's going to drop down. And so I knew it like when it hit 21K that it was going down from there, and it was not going to go up for a while. I mean, it could go up in any moment for any specific set of surprising reasons, but like in terms of the reasons why I saw it go up from where it was to where it ended up being, I didn't see anything after the 21.
Yeah, it very much seemed like a sell the news event kind of thing, where we got the futures in, right? Everybody was kind of trying to pile in for that. We got the futures, and turns out the futures barely did any volume at all, and so kind of the wind got out of the sails, and we needed to correct. Yeah.
I think a lot of people that were bringing in money had this FOMO of being able to move in between things like Ripple and Bitcoin without an added tax liability, which got added in January. And so I saw it sort of as this like market trap where a lot of bankers are trying to get as much money into Bitcoin, have Bitcoin go up as much as possible before December 31st, so they could pull as much money out of Bitcoin into Ripple. And then they were going to see if the fact that you wouldn't have as much liquidity between altcoins and Bitcoin, if they could hold the value and lock it in over there in Ripple. And that's kind of the wave I saw. And I know a lot of people that run sort of a lot of people, I wouldn't say know a lot of people, but of people that run these sort of boiler room things. And when you look in like the market and you see like illogical altcoins, like just climbing up into the top 300, and then things like Prime Coin and Namecoin not even being there. And Namecoin's like what the first altcoin, and Satoshi helped make it. And then Prime Coin's this very logical system that, in my opinion, has always made sense, but it doesn't do what we've wanted Bitcoin to do, if that makes sense. Like what we're looking to get out of Bitcoin in a self-sovereignty sense, Prime Coin isn't really about that, but it has
there's nothing else, right? There's nothing else about the self-sovereignty, I think, except Bitcoin.
Correct. And so like the Prime Coin and the Namecoin, I would like go and look at, and I'd be like, if all of these other things are pumping up, why are these two not even in the top 300? Because they're the only ones that I know of that are, at least from me being like a hardcore Bitcoin guy, they're the only two that even make sense. And then I start looking, and I realize that the guy that got hired to do the bots that are pumping up these altcoins so that they can all collapse into some other currency whenever the striking event happens, they forgot to add Namecoin and Primecoin into the market. And so there's just like things that you can look at and see like how illogical is the situation if the illogical things are not moving with the entire market. And so then you can start to derive motives from that, and like the things that things that you don't know, from all of the things that you do know, you just start to see things that make sense. And the predictions I made in January and December were extremely accurate. But now I have no idea what's going on in the market, because until I'm interested in looking at market prices again, which I don't see being like at least for another 6 to 9 months, I don't see any reasons for the market to move. But in 6 to 9 months, I see reasons for the market to move, if that makes sense.
Right. So yeah, and a lot of people try to tell people this, right? To pay more attention to the long term than the actual short, the day to day. Pay attention to the moving averages, like for example, Trace Mayer's Mayer multiple. That's a big one that I like to pay attention to as well. And so, yeah, I mean, it really was this very perfect FOMO storm that kind of just took the world by hold. And we've heard a lot about these crypto boiler rooms and like places like South Korea and things like that, where they're just basically just pumping these coins just all day long, and they don't care about they have no motivations other than to make money. That's literally just the only thing. They don't care what they're pumping or whatever. And so with that kind of craziness, we imagined the stuff is going crazy. But then now we have Charlie Shrem out there, right, saying that this is the last month we're ever going to see Bitcoin under 10,000. What do you think about that?
I mean, you could say these things, and he's been here long enough to know that you can make certain statements at certain points in time. And if you're wrong, you can delete it and you can re-put it out there, and then eventually it's right. So it's not really relevant. I think what's more important to realize is that the price is not as important as people's attention and their understanding of exactly what's going on. And so, how do I say this? I don't know why they think the price would go up, or I mean, it's just the price is a side effect of when things are going right or when people are extremely confused. And the price should make sense to you because it will repeat the same exact cycle of exponential attention being drawn in and the price going up accordingly every single time we hit a new milestone of people understanding things. But like if the people that are in front of all the people get caught up in the actual side effect of all the people coming to understanding, which would be the market price going up, then those people that are seeking understanding, looking to people that have understanding that they're catching up to. So like, to be clear on this, let's just say that I've been doing Bitcoin for a couple more years than you. And so I'm looking at something a little bit differently than what you're looking at, but you've been doing Bitcoin a couple more years than the average viewer of your show. And then the average viewer of your show has been in it a couple more years than their mom and dad. And so when I find something on the chain that, let's say, Satoshi put onto the chain or a dev put into some code, and I sit there and try to process what this could be contextually and start to build an idea around it relative to other ideas that I've been looking through. And then let's say in the form of a tweet, you and a couple other people that happen to follow me see this idea, and then you talk about it, and other people see you talking about it. And then later it's overheard in a conversation by somebody that's at a dinner table just over the holidays. That idea is being propagated to a lot of people, like that Kevin Bacon 6 degrees of separation deal. If the idea is important enough, remnants of it will be in everyone's mind, depending on what they're paying attention to. And so whenever the price goes up, what this means is that a large amount of people have been triggered by some kind of event, like an avalanche, like a rock hitting the side of a mountain, and just one little bit of snow starts going. But now everyone's following it because as this one wakes up, everyone else wakes up, and it's sort of like a jump start or a jolt. Someone like that's flatlined on the ER table, and whenever that jolt happens, all those people that were at the dinner table, they all of a sudden become viewers of the show. And all those people that were viewers of the show become people that are running the show. And all those people that are running the show start to do higher level organization. And then the higher level organization people that were doing that before start doing something else. And there's this sort of bottom up triangle of understanding what exactly is going on, and yet knowing that in a couple of years, you're going to understand things that you don't understand now that are happening right now. And so it's that time dilation that causes the price to have movements. And so blanket statements like we're not going to see 10,000 below 10,000 again are true, but they're not true because we're not even sure what we're calling Bitcoin today will be how we observe a market value of Bitcoin tomorrow. And so while focusing on the greatness of hitting a milestone and being able to observe that, yeah, it might not go down again is great because this is true. Figuring out what we're going to do right next and now, and staying where we're forever trying to loop on figuring out where we're going. And then when we do figure it out, taking the time to refactor our ideas and then propagate out something that's digestible as to like what we've seen and where we're going, so that it can propagate out and then allow the bottom layer of people who are unconsciously being told about Bitcoin related things and eventually will take the step and actually buy some to try to get skin in the game to tune themselves into a higher level of awareness. For them to be able to level up, we have to escape or escape that loop of observing the transition of levels, if that makes sense, to free up the room for them to now have the conversation of, I have no idea what the hell you guys are talking about.
Right.
So the people that just figured out can tell them. Otherwise, we're repeating the same thing indefinitely and we don't grow. And then the attention that we have to the system is greater than what the system can handle, because we haven't moved forward in thinking of how to handle what will happen when the next layer of people come in. And so the reason why this is a foreign concept is because we don't really have a science of technology yet. And Kevin Kelly's often said, like, that's the missing thing. And we have a science for biology, a science for chemistry, a science for physics. We don't have a science for tech. And I have this theory that technology is just built around a very large, strange cosmic loop, and that the quantum mechanics of the universe have this loop repeating itself over and over and over and over in everything we do. And that creates a whole paradox related to duality that confuses the hell out of people, because it's obvious, but it's not obvious, and it makes sense and it never makes sense. And constantly figuring out more of who we are as we move forward, constantly becoming, is the only stable ground, I guess one can say, I would say, that you can build against to figure out things that other people don't know.
Yeah. So it really much feels like this asynchronous information that we situation that we kind of find ourselves in, creates these cycles, right? These phases and these loops. And it really seems like, shows like ours try to break those loops, or at least provide information for the next people, for the next phase of people to come in and start thinking about that, because it's really important, like you say, to start thinking about the next phase, about what we're going to do when people come in and when we go to 100,000. Like, what are we going to do
happened
then?
Between the time that I was on with you, where you were sitting on a couch, and now that you have a background, that information you've gained by tuning against Bitcoin. It has changed you. Whatever caused that to happen has changed you, and then the perception that people have of you has changed, and then that's changed them. And then when they do things, let's say they come on your show as a guest, they put a background up maybe themselves. That's copycat. They're copying you. They're learning from you. This is a very, very base programming language. And it's the most powerful one. It's below machine code. It's literally it's just the base logic.
I like to call it
information.
I like to call it the story base, right? The story, because that's how humans learn at the most fundamental level, is through stories and storytelling, right?
Storyboarding. And this is why I've been spending the last couple months researching comic books, and how they handle continuality, how they handle situations like what Bitcoin is in. Like, and I found some really interesting stuff. Like, they handle it very well, actually. And it's but I don't even remember what the question was. So whatever you want to ask me next, I'll answer.
Yeah. So we got I wanted to. So then I think we can now jump right into kind of what maybe it's becoming a little bit of a famous tweet now, about your speaking about how SegWit, in your mind, sort of ends Bitcoin's network effects, because we have, as Trace Mayer likes to say, we have over 7 network effects, at least that Bitcoin is playing around with, all the way to going to the very end network effect, which is the global standard, right? With all these network effects that Bitcoin is turning, and then which turns more, and then turns more, and then turns more, how maybe you can go into a little bit about why you believe SegWit, or maybe the BEC32 spec for addresses sort of end some of Bitcoin's network effects.
Yeah, this will be fun. So there was this old chart that came out after Google Plus launched, showing like how long it took Facebook to get to so many millions of users. And it showed that Facebook over, I don't know what the time period was, but let's say it was 10 years, got to an unimaginable amount of 100 million X users. And then it showed that like in 14 days, Google Plus got to that. And the reason why Google Plus got to that in 14 days is because Google Plus didn't have to bootstrap their own network effect to create a social network. All they had to do was create an incentive system. And the incentive system was the earlier you registered, the earlier you could register your username. The earlier you registered your username, google.com/plus, whatever your username was yours. And you had learned from the last time, like Facebook, Twitter, and whatnot, that if you didn't get your username, you ended up with a really bad one. And so the simple fact that you used Google already for Gmail, and the simple fact that you had Facebook, and the incentive, however they presented it to you, they might have just waited till you updated your YouTube thing and automatically signed you up, or added it whenever you added a profile picture to your Gmail account, or made you require Google Plus to log into something. But whatever they did, it resulted in them achieving the same network effect without the same meaning as Facebook in terms of how they had connections between people. In terms of the raw numbers, they had matched it, and the advertisers and the markets, the public markets, this mattered to them, and so this reflected itself in the market price of the companies, and it reflected itself in the company's market price. It changed how much money the people on the boards and the employees were paid.
Would you call it
that they had agreed on?
Sure. Would you call it an artificial network effect, maybe then?
So that wouldn't be like Bitcoin. That's not like Bitcoins. That's just an example of how one thing, a social network for Facebook, took a long time to get its value, its user base. And Google Plus was able to get what appeared to be that same value very quickly. And so whenever you have, for instance, Bitcoin's address space, that's 10 years of transactions that have happened. People have died since then. People have died that were alive in 2009 to 2011 that we don't know who they were. Maybe some of them have mined some Bitcoin. Maybe some of them just accumulated a ton in one spot and they're gone. And their money's never going to move. And we could, we can separate these things out. We can see how much Bitcoin is dormant, when it stopped moving. We can see whatever. But the main important thing to see here is that there's this language in the form of the address space that since the beginning of Bitcoin has been the medium by which we've communicated our expression of transactions between one another. And so with ASICs, once Bitcoin's bootstrap happened, because you realize Satoshi said, let's hold off, let's have a gentleman agreement on the GPU mining that's inevitable. Like before we go to complete war with one another, let's actually try to create a good spirit of like what Bitcoin is supposed to be in terms of decentralization. Like we can mine the crap out of it, but if we mine a lot of it right now, it won't be worth anything because we won't grow, because people won't be able to CPU mine right when they join. Well, then ASICs come along, and ASICs, after the GPU mining starts, are pretty much the fastest idea to delivering an actual product in terms of hardware engineering that's ever been seen. And so ASICs come onto the scene, and now all of a sudden there's these ASIC miners who are making a lot of money. And this money isn't necessarily going back into Bitcoin, other than that it's going to exchanges to pay for power bills. And so now the exchanges are receiving money being propagated to them from the miners and it's allowing them to run businesses. And this running of the businesses is allowing them to, the libertarians that would have cared about the miners developing the ASICs built an exchange. They didn't complain about the ASICs existing. They built the exchange by which the miners flowed Bitcoin out. And so these early companies that had emerged compromised their morals in terms of being just a direct base level user that just runs a full node at their house, to saying, okay, we'll accept ASICs because we're going to run an exchange, or we'll accept ASICs because now that you are mining with your ASICs, you can pay for an advertisement, or we'll accept ASICs because we can buy ASICs from you, so it's not centralized towards you. But what people had not really processed then, because they couldn't look back and see what was happening, is that Bitcoin was evolving it was still decentralized because it's not you having to call me and say, Andrew, I want to send $500 to Bill. Can you just go ahead and update that? And when Bill calls you, can you just tell him that he has 500 for me? That would be centralized. It was decentralized, but it's now decentralized in a way that it could not have, if it had started with ASICs, it would, in the beginning, you had to have ASICs to just even be involved from the very first block. It would have been centralized because it would have been centralized around these special computers. The special computers come out of the system, and instead you have a situation that looks a lot like centralization for people coming in that are new. And so Bitcoin continues to grow, the market continues to learn more about it, and the price continues to go up. And the meme of attacking it for decentralization or centralization is always there if polarity emerges. It's the easiest way to attack it. But what people don't realize is now ASIC boost comes into play. The game of ASICs continues to evolve, and we cannot see it. It's happening in a realm that we're just either not aware of or we're not looking at it yet. Whenever Slush Pool adopted the ability for their miners to do ASIC boost, that was a continual evolution of the system where people were offended at first that ASIC boost was there, that Bitmain was putting out empty blocks to create a predictable header to grind against so that they could reshuffle their transactions in such a way that created a statistical advantage for their network to compete. And so as that happened and Bitcoin continued to exist and the Nash equilibrium of the situation prevented Bitmain from doing anything other than annoy us. They weren't filtering our transactions. They were just pissing us off because it gets annoying during that phase where a lot of people are transitioning from being completely either disenfranchised or they were never involved in the main financial system. Then they're in Bitcoin, and then Bitcoin hits its first exponential gain for them. And now they're like living in a world where they're transitioning between how much do I hodl? I don't have a really good bank. How do I move money from Bitcoin to dollars and back? Like the ways in which they do that for their day-to-day situations. Some people go to a Bitcoin ATM. Some people only transact with people who accept Bitcoin. People chose their own ways of living their life at certain points in time with Bitcoin, and they changed. The hardest core people leveraged, use leverage credit to buy as much Bitcoin as possible and then always paid off a certain amount. So there are ways that people were living in both systems, and how they interacted with the world at a certain point in time also happens to correspond with how Bitmain was mining blocks at a certain point in time, and a bit of friction had emerged there. People started talking back. Like, it got annoying if you were sitting there waiting for 40 minutes on a block, the next block was empty, and then the blocks were full, because a lot of people were learning about it, but everyone was fighting. Well, the next big switch is this next realization. Mining, so hackers are already doing it. If I can think of a private key that has meaning within the system if I use it, but I have to send Bitcoin to it, and anyone else can think of that same private key, Bitcoin in a state of pure presence, every thought that's been had related to Bitcoin is reflected on the chain. Meaning, if I thought about something in Bitcoin and it's something that is very specific to, let's say, the Genesis block or a certain transaction, the act of me expressing that thought to actually view and see it is viewable by anyone else, because they can look up after they have that same thought and go and look and see if someone's already had that thought or if they're the first to have that thought. And so if you write something to the blockchain in a situation that I would call having naked private keys, and an example I'll give you later is like how DOS uses Bitcoin's address space to put private keys into transactions that you then derive public keys from, create addresses from, and then combine with the address that injected it in there to create a one-time pad. Like, there's a lot of different tricks that you can do just based on how the address space has evolved. But an incentive, like, eventually what happens, because this transition towards SegWit addresses hasn't even been quick. Like, the fact that we can even talk about it shows that this is as big of a transition as adding SegWit was. The SegWit address thing people didn't even want to talk about it when they were doing SegWit, because they knew the SegWit address thing wasn't something they could bundle into one transitional thing. And there's only one reason why people want the SegWit address space, and I'll get into that later too. But basically, anyone that finds a way to embed a rule set into Bitcoin's address space and a way to write the code to read the Bitcoin address space and then run a chain off of the Bitcoin address space is able to effectively inherit every single user Bitcoin has, because they can immediately issue themselves tokens or their own new currency, basically, and then send it to addresses that are verifiably have been used by someone. And that's the same thing Google Plus did. When you realize what I said earlier about Google Plus being able to make an incentive off of the username type thing, where all of the Facebook users, now that Facebook existed, could propagate a link on Google Plus saying, Google Plus is here. Sign up and get your username today. And now all of the Facebook network effect, knowing that they want to have that vanity badge thing, that desire was created by Google, an incentive. They now have propagated something within Facebook, and they've clicked the link and they've gone to Google, and now Google is the same size as Facebook because of a crafting of incentives. When you change the address space and you move towards nothing but that, you're giving up all of the past 10 years of transactions and all of the meaning that's like embedded within that, and saying that's not what Bitcoin is, and then freeing it for anyone else to be able to come in and go, well, your old node doesn't work with them and your old node doesn't work with me, but you can actually, from the information that your old node accumulated before it stopped working, you can use that secure data to decompile some code I put in there and continue running on that chain without confusion, and it continues to go. And so what ends up happening is, whenever you realize that the right incentives placed into the system, in the same way ASICs were a certain set of incentives placed into the system, they may break the rules of how people see something today, but tomorrow there might be more power and more energy directed at another continuality of the chain that was not expected in the beginning. The most important thing is the shared genesis. How you make a continuality work within the laws of physics defined by that genesis as like the starting point of a universe, is limited only by quantum mechanics. It's not limited in any means by public opinion or consensus, because Nash equilibriums emerge. We don't dictate their existence.
So it sounds like to me that, you're worried about the fact that this address change, can kind of throw
the address
maybe
change
developers
is
for
really
a loop.
stupid. Right? The address change maps to very small integers. We need the addresses to map to very large integers. We need the address space to correspond to a public key, and we need the public key to correspond to a private key, and that private key needs to correspond to a very, very, very large integer, because that correspondence to a very, very, very large integer is why the network has grown over the past 10 years the way it has. A lot of the most valuable aspects of the network that have yet to be digested by anyone, like a large majority of people, are accidental. It's as simple as the compressed and uncompressed format of Bitcoin addresses, or the ability to create or to mine short addresses that you can embed in the same base 58 encoding as the actual addresses themselves to create deltas. It's the ability to put one-time pads on the chain and have zero interaction between individuals, but being able to drive information and meaning. Let's put it this way: space and time are a continuum, and you can observe space and time as concepts in and of themselves, but they're relative concepts, like miles per hour, speed, how far you can get over, how far you can go in space over a given period of time. If you can change via technology how long it takes for you to get somewhere, you can change what a long time really is. if that makes sense.
Right, but remember, this is backwards compatible, though, right? This is not, and this is why another reason why it takes so long to kind of update the network in the system is because it is completely 100% voluntary to update to this.
So it's voluntary, but whenever I downloaded the Electrum wallet in January, the default address was being pushed as SegWit. Whenever I used my Trezor, the Bitcoin address spaces I had formerly been developing address was now called legacy accounts. New users that were coming in based on the network effect created over the last 10 years are being piped into the default mode. And they are a much larger group than the group that got it to where it got over the past 10 years. And they think they're entering into the same network, but they're not. And then that creates this massive amount of confusion. And that confusion is very, very easy to fix if someone steals the network effect by creating incentives and saying you can actually just, even if you went into the SegWit address space, if you had an address before you went into the SegWit address space, that address could receive something by somebody if they wanted to create that incentive. I'm not saying I'm creating an incentive by issuing coins or tokens or anything to anyone that has an address space, but I'm saying that the network effect and the address space itself is now free for anyone to start spamming all of the people who've ever been involved in Bitcoin with temptations to go back and find those old private keys and to actually go to an exchange and create a market for a Bitcoin derivative or a fork or something that all it is just the old Bitcoin address space. That's now free game, free for all for anything that makes its time horizon, building off of that into infinity. And so now it has the longest chain of a common language, whereas SegWit starts today, and it becomes Google Plus competing against itself.
Okay, but it's not competing per se against itself because, for example, like, it doesn't exactly change the relationship between the private and the public key. You still have the private key with a SegWit address that's directly connected to the. It's directly connected to the blockchain. Like the private key of a SegWit address.
And so,
directly verifiable, backwards compatible.
Whenever they created the legacy accounts versus the modern accounts, with the modern accounts being accounts that start with the 3 that are SegWit compatible, why didn't the same exact code work for signing any piece of information?
Right. The address format is different.
The address format is different. The meaning comes from taking an address format that corresponds to a public key that is not revealed until the address performs a transaction, meaning I can send Bitcoin to an address and no one will know that that address belongs to me until I observe that address with a transaction from that address revealing the public key. And so there's 3 layers of identity in that sense, where you have an address, you have a public key that's private until it's not, and then you have a private key that's always private. And I'm saying that being able to embed private keys into that address space, creating a strange loop there, is equivalent to the Gödel exception incompleteness theorem. And if Bitcoin were Principia Mathematica, Gödel's incompleteness theorems would be a system that puts a private key in an address itself and then is able to make layers of meaning from there.
So maybe you can tell us a little bit, because you also tweeted this about how DirectX relates to this address format change, because I didn't, because you mentioned that and I didn't understand.
The old machine code used by DirectX is compatible with the current address space, meaning that what was used to spawn the Xbox DirectX, and look up it's like DirectX Chrome or IE Chrome. I'll find you a link to it like later. It's the original API for DirectX to Internet Explorer. The guys that built out DirectX somehow influenced the code that ended up creating the Bitcoin addresses themselves, meaning that it's actually bytecode. It's actually, everyone sees it as an address, but there's meaning within there that's encrypted with one-time pads that you can't see because it actually has information theoretic perfect security. And so the way I kind of look at Bitcoin now is more of an ink blot where everyone looks at it and they see what they want to see if they know how to look at it correctly. And DirectX what powered the Xbox, and Steve Jobs originally had Halo as a video game that was supposed to launch on the Macintosh, but there was a hack, or there was some kind of bad CD drive that got sent out by Bungie. A bad game got sent out by Bungie, and before they could do a launch of Apple with Halo being the main game for like the Mac OS X or whatever, they were getting sued by like everyone in Japan because one of their games was wiping every computer there. And so Microsoft ends up buying Halo, and then Halo ends up getting packaged with the Xbox as the main game for the Xbox. And now the Xbox has Xbox Live. The Xbox has continued to grow as a network, and all of the growth that Apple would have gotten had the Halo game started out on Apple's machines, moved towards the Xbox, and DirectX had its own private bytecode that evolved against that growth. And so all of these things that people who have built out a whole three-dimensional reality of multiplayer interactions happens to be compatible with Bitcoin. And I kind of see that as the world becoming Unreal Engine, where it's like they built out game engines that use DirectX, and Unreal Engine was this engine that you would play video games in, and it has its own set of physics and own set of rules. Well, now Bitcoin's dictating your life. And it just so happens that Bitcoin's address space is compatible with the exact same assembly code used for video game engines based on DirectX. And so when it comes to what it means for the universe, to a holographic universe with growing blocks in terms of time, when you start to really think about what that means and how Bitcoin works, and how virtual reality and base reality relate to one another in terms of having artificial physics and actual physics and whatnot, you start to realize that it's strange. I'll put it that way.
So then let's move on a little bit, because what are your thoughts about Lightning? Because obviously without SegWit, fixing the malleability fix, Lightning wouldn't really be as possible as it is today. And of course, SegWit gives us a million other benefits too, like the ability to add anything that we want with the software, with versioning and stuff. But yeah,
if all the source code for Lightning were embedded into transaction puzzles and put into the Bitcoin address space itself, and then people who wanted to participate in the Lightning network derived a Lightning node from Bitcoin and then initialized Lightning, they could do that. That would be very complicated, very hard, very time consuming, because Lightning was a top down planned network. It wasn't a network that emerged. You could do it. Doesn't necessarily mean it's the best idea.
So who was it top down plan? Because there was a paper that was released, right? And then a few different teams, completely decentralized, a few teams around the world decided to pick that up and start creating a spec. And then they launched that spec, which then allows all these other wallets to kind of create wallets from that spec. So how was it a top down?
You would have to actually go out of your way and start up a node by going onto the internet and finding the source code for the node. You can't have the code for the node come out of the code that is embedded within Bitcoin itself, which you already have, is what makes it top down. It's the delivery of it. Lightning Network built on code that shipped over the internet and is only secured by the GPG signatures of individuals. And those GPG signatures are rooted in, I made this GPG signature key. I made this GPG private key pair a long time ago, and you know that somebody knows that it's mine, versus here's some money that I paid you, and here's an address that I've used to embed information in the chain. If this code doesn't work, I stole your money because I referred it to you. That difference, what will happen when someone's trying to actually embed things into Bitcoin versus what will happen when people are trying to create things outside of Bitcoin with the long-term hope that whoever invested in them, they're going to be able to pay back. And for some reason, you're going to eventually pay them. Bitcoin improvements shouldn't have to justify their meaning to boards. It's that simple. And so
right. So then you're not. So you're currently not
Lightning,
happy with the current implementation of the Lightning spec and how developers are implementing these, creating these wallets and building out this network.
Right now, Bitcoin wouldn't exist if we didn't have ASICs, because ASICs are the only way we can continue to mine blocks without backdoors in our CPUs. Absolutely,
right, but Lightning doesn't.
Everything.
Well, sure, but Lightning doesn't
requires
preclude
that you run it atop a system that
right.
is not as secure as Bitcoin.
Right.
And so whenever you're creating a derivative system, that networks are extremely fragile, and peer-to-peer networks that are derivatives built on top of other peer-to-peer networks that are now pulling from the base network's network effect, run the risk of just being absolutely wrecked by some 0 day that's just waiting for a large percentage of the Bitcoin network to enter into that fragile state that hasn't come from Bitcoin. It's come and it's trying to dictate how Bitcoin should be.
And that makes sense. And that's why, of course, we tell people that, you're a little bit reckless if you try to go on the Lightning Network right this early and things like that. So we do, of course, advise people, to use caution, because this is very, very beta software. And that's why, in fact, there are limits on the size of the amount of Bitcoin that you can send and things right now in Lightning, just, to make sure that it doesn't kind of explode too early. And destroy Bitcoin.
Decentralized emergent network doesn't have regulations and limits. What's to stop you from putting your money into Lightning Network and those limits that are imposed right now from being added later?
Right. And so there's nothing, because remember that it's going to evolve. But I guess my point is that, why, what's the alternative then? Without Lightning, then we have a slower system that will not be able to achieve,
we can process transactions with GPUs now. So we can process transactions in real time using GPUs now. And a lot of people that were here early
with a shitload of GPUs, right? With like a bunch of,
just your GPU in the Mac itself. If every GPU on every Mac were used to process the transactions when a block was propagated, the speed at which we could process that block, if the blocks were bigger, and the GPUs, because Moore's law is every 4 years you buy a new computer, or 8 years, or however long it is, the base GPU in a system, if we're sacrificing every 10 minutes some attention from our GPU to process the validity of a block, we can process larger blocks because the GPU is more powerful. And if that makes our system more secure and allows us to, in addition to that, decompile or decompress some things that have been compressed in those blocks, which could technically be larger, then we're working with more information that is secure, and that's creating less room on our machines for information that's not secure, and that's changing ourselves. And so if we go, well, actually, no, instead of changing ourselves, we're just going to keep processing things with CPUs, but actually, you know what, we're just going to attack the network effect, attack the miners, say, screw the addresses, since a lot of people maybe got money from doing things on Silk Road, why don't we just delete the whole address space and hide in a new format and just see if everyone will move their money there? And that way we can transact for the first time in our life without having to worry that people will trace back to how we originally got our money. There's no reason to even be having a conversation about a transition towards something else if there's no reason to have it if it's not naturally producing something that's growing. There shouldn't even be a conflict, if that makes sense. There shouldn't even be.
I wish we lived in a perfect world too, Andrew. But I think that for example, the idea hold on, the idea that you're suggesting to replace Lightning is to everybody run a custom script with GPU and things like that. I think that's less feasible.
Instead of Lightning was the payment channels that we pushed at 21. That people who have been hardcore Lightning and SegWit people did not even know about bidirectional payment channels 2 years ago.
It is possible without
people have dictated what they're going to do. And if you've run a company before, you know that the people that are tied to the things that they've said they're going to do will go down with the ship. They don't have a choice. Their reputation's tied to it. If they found out that they were wrong about something, a year in, they cannot go back. People that are not tied to any outcome can do whatever they want. But the ones that are tied to a specific outcome, lightning was described as a word before people described it as a network. And a lot of people that know about Bitcoin still know nothing about how lightning works or how it relates to Bitcoin. But the fact that it's a continual conversation piece that's continued to be brought up, and it's not just something that people are doing because they're loving it. It's like, fucking lightning, we did it, we're doing it, yay. The fact that people aren't just dancing and screaming like we're doing it.
I see that though, Andrew.
That
I see that on Twitter, people dancing and screaming. Like I saw somebody at the coffee shop, the other day work with the Eclair Lightning Wallet, and he on that he was very excited. And then I saw, and there's a few people, man, that are come through my Twitter list that are quite excited when they are able to use Lightning because they've achieved this, right? Because Lightning actually works, and these are mainnet transactions. So I do see people jumping up and down. I'm one of those people probably that is jumping up and down when I can create a Lightning when I can actually have a Lightning transaction with something like TorGuard, because you can purchase through the services with Lightning through TorGuard. That's just an amazing thing.
And Lightning, but you're going over Tor, and Tor isn't a quantum secured network. But you're still using computers that are not.
Right.
Bitcoin reveals that all the other computers that are not Bitcoin are not as secure as Bitcoin. And so Bitcoin revealing that all the other machines are not secure means that all the other machines end up having to become as secure as Bitcoin, or over time, this awareness that all the machines are not secure will create an incentive system where all of these hackers and people that are very creative are now trying to mine Bitcoin by attacking the weak point, and that would be the operating system. You don't want that because you want Bitcoin to grow long past us being dead. And if we all die and the same OSs running today are still running Bitcoin, then the people that forgot how Bitcoin was created and the people that forgot how the operating system's created will now be in charge of figuring out how to secure everything. And they have no clue what's going on. And so as Bitcoin, as a singularity, an entity of understanding, is growing because everything else isn't as secure as it. And so that means your financial assets, like you're not, when people worry about their money at a bank, if a bank gets hacked and their books are wiped, you might have issues with your online money, but that doesn't happen with Bitcoin. Now, if every single computer is hacked, and I'm talking like a doomsday type, every machine gets hit with some 0-day and there's just mass confusion, it doesn't matter that a couple of nodes are running somewhere if the nodes can't propagate to all the people, that the network's intact. And so as Bitcoin grows, it becomes its own worst enemy. There's an innovator's dilemma of now Bitcoin has to secure the thing that it's destroying and pulling value from, or its pulling of that value will cause it to collapse in on itself. And I'm saying that when you add Lightning as a layer above Bitcoin without solving the problem below Bitcoin, you end up in a situation where there's just going to be mass confusion if there's one ripple through the network, that just 1 0-day or one attack performed at the right time with ad networks simultaneously attacking, and it's gone. But you can actually jump out, have a better internet. You can actually build within Bitcoin to inherit Bitcoin's security, and it can actually become such a draw of attention by the Bitcoin network as it has existed over the past 10 years that it causes the network to elevate itself consciously and actually continue moving forward, but changing how it does this. And so it's the idea that 10 years ago, you might start a Bitcoin node and start accumulating Bitcoin. And then 10 years later, from that same machine, you might, from the Bitcoin transactions that your node has stored and monitored and validated as you've gone since then, might boot your machine up from that and then actually run Bitcoin from a machine that has been booted from Bitcoin, and then using that to interact and build things from that. That's a completely different thing than trying to put a top-down network, but like WebSockets, over a network of computers that we know are backdoored at the UEFI level, that we know are not running operating systems the way they used to. Like when UEFI is the basis of the Mac boot, and the Mac is one of the main operating systems used by normal people that are just using computers to compute for themselves. And self-sovereignty is supposed to come from Bitcoin. And then they're building things out and they're compromising. Well, it's a Mac. I can't trust Mac, so let's go use some other service. That's where they first messed up. Well, then they go get a computer from Dell. Dell has the same UEFI, replacing the BIOS. And so if you're not figuring out how to actually bootstrap the UEFI from within Bitcoin so that you can then boot your machine up to then boot Bitcoin securely from Bitcoin, you're not moving forward on that strange loop, the bootstrap problem, the S-curve, the innovator's dilemma. I'm saying that, like, in the innovator's dilemma, they talk about how companies that built mainframes were focused on very large hard drives, and they wanted to increase the size of very large hard drives, and advancements in small hard drives they did not notice. And so they're like, why would anyone want a 3 megabyte tiny little drive? And fast forward, to when GPS is created. Someone created a really tiny drive that didn't have very much space, and it created the entire GPS device market. And everyone that was focused on these very large hard drives completely missed the advancement of the small one because they were focusing on increasing the capacity of that large drive instead of realizing what you could do with the tiny capacity of the new small drive. And then once the tiny small drive started to be used in devices, people's attention was focused on how to improve those small drives, and those small drives started to have capacities that were competing with the large drives, to the point that people stopped making the large drives and they made converter drives that fit the same chassis of the large drives and put the tiny drives inside of the large drives. And every single company that made a bet that the large drives were going to be the future during that transition is gone. And every single company that made the bet that the small drives were going to replace GPS now rules the small drive and the adapter market for those larger drives. And so, sure, when I say yes, you could put Lightning within Bitcoin and then it would become this bottom-up thing. Just because you have the output of a top-down construct doesn't mean you need to even use it later. If you realize just being present and understanding a deeper understanding of yourself and actually building out with what you have versus trying to build out to receive a reward in the future. Like I said, you can embed Lightning in Bitcoin if you want, but I don't really think there's a point once you learn that you can embed anything within Bitcoin. I guess it's the point that I'm trying to make. You can embed it, but if you realize that you can embed it, you also realize that it didn't really matter that much to begin with, because the embedding feature allows you to do a lot more if you understand how to do quantum key distribution. It's people are just very confused. And it's not because people are dumb or people aren't smart or people aren't seeing the right thing or that someone else has seen the right thing. It's that the innovator's dilemma. Every single time we have an S-curve with something that's growing, the S-curve transition is transitioning more people. And every time we transition more people, keeping more people present with the state of things becomes increasingly harder. And eliminating the basics, like just the simple address space, that's very bad. It's just not good. It would be fine. I would not.
But again, we're not eliminating it.
But you are if you realize that adding in, because there's 7 billion people on the planet, and as you add more people to Bitcoin, if you make the default settings the thing, then you make the base thing become the minority over time, and there's no time horizon being built on the time horizon that we have already been working against. And the time horizon we've been working against is we can HODL inside of our addresses. You can HODL to a private key built on a paper wallet. You'll have an address tied to it. You never have to move that. If you want to be the longest term investor of all time, you should be able to do that, and it's perfectly fine. And now, to participate in the Lightning Network, you're supposed to migrate your coins to a new address type that's not that. So what if you're dead? What's going to happen whenever your coin's just sitting there and it's not being used, and all of these people have started switching to this new network. Star Wars Galaxies, the new game enhancements. It's that transition.
Right.
It's
And
the
so
Jedi's as a thing that emerges out of the system versus being a top-down class, something that's immediately added. People will leave like the NGE, and you see things like SWGE and MU pop up. It's the same pattern, and the market does not understand this. The market reacts to news and information, and the market reacts to lies. The market doesn't care about the validity of something. It just cares about what it thinks people believe, and it buys into that. And so if there's no reason to worry about the network effect being attacked until it is, that's not factored into the market price, and people that only loop on the price will be completely blind to the black swan that would be completely being erased from the Bitcoin network.
Sure. Well, we'll just end this particular topic with, like, I'm a big believer in backwards compatibility when it comes to Bitcoin, which is why I'm such a big supporter of the Bitcoin Core process, because they make this paramount, right? They make security paramount, they make backwards compatibility paramount, so that you can spin up a node all the way back then, so that you can still hodl forever and ever and never actually have to use. And in fact, never have to use Segway. And in fact, Lightning, again, is a network that's being made for smaller payments. So the whole idea of Lightning was never ever and is never to completely replace Bitcoin. It was only to solve an issue of these high frequency, smaller transactions that need to happen. And so that's a big part. I just kind of want to end this with, because there's more stuff we got to get to. Andrew, there's a lot of stuff, man. So let me just ask you, what is your take then on this whole idea of security tokens that are now coming out on the market, with T0 and things like that? Have you gotten a chance to look into all that?
T0, like the overstock company?
Yeah. Is that in your purview?
Securities?
All these security tokens and stuff like that.
You can issue a security against a regulatory body that enforces securities, and you can take the document and you can hash it and you can peg it to the chain and show a transaction that corresponds to that security. And so if some regulatory body is allowing T0 to use 3 companies that they vault up that already can do transactions related to securities to put hashes of securities onto a chain, good for them, but that's not surprising.
So it doesn't seem very interesting to you. Okay. And that makes sense. And that's kind of the same. Yeah, and that's kind of the same with me. Like, I'm not super interested in like these security tokens, but of course it's kind of the buzz right now. But again, it's just like, it's the next altcoin, it's the next ICO, it's the next thing that somebody's trying to make more money off of instead of actually building on the base. Which of course is Bitcoin, the only actual public blockchain at scale. So that's interesting. So let me just ask you this then. What is your latest thoughts on Bcash, on the whole BCH movement and the fork and things like that in the community over there? What are your thoughts on their efforts on trying to make zero confirmations a thing, like completely secure, which of course can never happen? What is your thoughts on what they're doing over? Do you have any thoughts on what they're doing over there right now?
I don't watch them either. They're far less organized than Core. To be clear, like, Vladimir is the best developer in the entire world. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with the developers in Core. You could build perfect technology on bad information and it not solve the problem that the information is posing. Bitcoin Cash's dev team will never be as good as Vladimir and his group, because Vladimir and them have done things from Bitcoin's low price to the high price. And the decisions they've made have been what I can only assume is the best decisions that I don't believe that they've ever made a decision that wasn't what they felt as the smartest decision in any given situation when it comes to the very, very, very core group. What I do believe and have issue with is, I have seen bi-directional payment channels before Lightning, and I saw what you could do with it. And it was a means to an end, just like Lightning is. And you can have people use it for low transactions and whatnot, but just resetting the default state as more people are brought in and siphoning to that is a bad long-term planning strategy. Now then, back to Bcash. I think that the Bcash thing was inevitable and that the chain would split, but I don't consider, whenever I did a certain transaction into the BTC chain, that I would like to have in every single derivative fork that later comes from the BTC chain, and it's in the Bitcoin Gold chain. I didn't make a point to go back to the Bitcoin Cash chain and write that same transaction in. I quite simply don't care about the Bitcoin Cash chain. And so while my address space, while I can write to the Bcash chain, and I can write to the Bitcoin chain, and I can write to the Bitcoin Gold chain from the same private key, dividing a message up over multiple channels, any changes they do, I hope it forks it again and allows me to have more channels to write to. But in terms of it being a currency that I would anchor time in or something like that, there's absolutely not a chance. Not a chance in hell.
And why would that be? Is that because of the lack of skill of the developers, or?
Well, it's when you get to the center of new information being created, the further away you get from that center, the less clear the message will be. And so when you go and set up a Bitcoin Core node, that will run perfectly on your machine, but it doesn't have to take into account all the things you might already be running on your machine, or the consequences of running a node that's going to start being attacked by people, and then finding out other information about you from the other things that you're running in parallel to the Bitcoin Core node. Bitcoin Cash, they didn't make the core node, they forked it. And so when you use Electrum as like a Python client, if you're not running your own node and you connect to an Electrum server, 9 times out of 10, it's usually dangerous. Like, it's not something you want to connect to. And so Electrum, being a good code base that when used with Core is a good code base when used with a proper operating system, is a good stack. That's only because the guy that maintains the Electrum code base builds it against the Core code base, and the servers that he references in his own client run Core, and he's probably set it up himself. For the average user to come into Bcash, okay, so maybe the Bcash nodes are stable and the miners are functioning. That Electrum thing, I'm not even entirely sure there's a functioning Electrum fork with a verified developer. And then the servers that are running the clients, not a chance that I'm connecting to a single one of those, even if I'm rocking some Tails setup or some Cubes OS thing, or if I have a foreign server. There's nothing that you can do that makes that a good idea. There's just no. So,
well, that's good to hear, because that's how I feel. That's how I feel the same way. Their lack of security, their horrible amateur way of doing updates, without even, using signatures. They're just saying, trust us, trust this latest version, trust this exe. It's no problem. So that kind of stuff is what's really scary to me.
They shouldn't trust themselves, even if they're genuinely good people.
Yeah.
You can't.
You can't on machines that are owned, from the start. So yeah, it makes sense. So let me just ask you one kind of final, like, high level question, and then I want to ask you, Andrew, what you're working on. So first, let me ask you, like, just what is your just general thoughts on Bitcoin's, where we are now in Bitcoin's global adoption? How do you think it's coming along? Do you think we're going slower than we should, or maybe we should faster? And then like NASDAQ now coming in, right? New York Stock Exchange. What is your kind of just over-level thoughts of how Bitcoin is evolving in the world right now?
So NASDAQ and New York Stock Exchange would be, quote unquote, coming in to Bitcoin. And I don't know what they're coming into or how they're coming in, but before you tell me, the only reason I can think of that they're rushing to anything, because they're very aware what Bitcoin is. NASDAQ follows me on Twitter. Like, NASDAQ's been here for a long time. I talked to NASDAQ in like 2014 about Bitcoin. And I talked to ARM in 2015 about Bitcoin. They know a lot about Bitcoin. Before I showed any of the stuff I've shown anyone on Twitter, anything, I tried to get it in front of NASDAQ, and I tried to get in front of ARM. So they're very aware of things. The only reason they'd be making a move now is they themselves are afraid that the IPO, which hasn't been used properly, in my honest opinion, for over a decade. Companies are not IPOing the way they used to, and as a result, it's creating very weird situations like Uber. They're scared to death that these Ethereum tokens are going to be declared IPOs, and now, while those people might be put in jail for doing ICOs, NASDAQ and New York Stock Exchange are afraid that them being put in jail and the side effect of those ICOs being IPOs means that the past 2 years They haven't done any of what they're supposed to do. And now every single company on their exchange will ICO somehow legally after regulators create the legal token security. And now NASDAQ and New York Stock Exchange are scared to death that they're going to be murdered by regulation, not by running good businesses. And so they're the ones that are being screwed over the most for participating in the network that was the government approved securities exchange.
But why would they be afraid of regulation when they pretty much write the regulation for the regulators?
I mean, they're companies. I mean, they have influence in the sense that while they have influence, they can use it. But if everyone has gotten all this money from scammy tokens, and the people that are supposed to go to jail for that go to jail, and the regulatory bodies come in and make certain rulings, the simple fact that they missed what is being declared securities, and it happened like Napster style. Like no one approved of it. They get pulled into the Senate hearing. They have to explain themselves. If NASDAQ and New York Stock Exchange don't act on what they've been doing is not acting, the conservative move, and they've just been watching. But if they don't act now with some sort of initial regulatory approved introduction to ICO type IPOs, their belief is that they'll be dead in a couple years, and that's a dangerous situation. Like, it doesn't necessarily mean it's good that they're moving because they know they could have moved before. It means they're going to be replaced eventually by something else. Whoever was planning on these securities, these ICOs being called securities, and whoever didn't do ICOs will replace NASDAQ and New York Stock Exchange in the long term because they planned on NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange messing up unless NASDAQ or New York Stock Exchange buys them.
Yeah, because they've already been buying up all sorts of crypto exchanges and things like that. So, okay, that makes sense. So then let's ask you then, DeSantis, what are you working on right now, Andrew? Like, what are you working on in the Bitcoin space specifically, I suppose, and let us know. Yeah.
So it's interesting. I have a soundboard behind me, and I've been making my own circuits, and so I've been outputting information as sound and working on a CDMA protocol to replace the internet, basically, where we propagate off moon bounces information to each other. It comes out of Bitcoin, and then I'm building all of my house and land and property, and basically my entire life around, bootstrapping out of Bitcoin and then maintaining communication over a quantum network. Uses quantum key distribution and whatnot. It's so very complicated and hard to explain, but like
still trying to make. It sounds like you're still.
People that know what I'm doing are present and are very aware of what's going on actively, and then everyone else on the outside is having to deal with a time dilation. And so with them, they get real-time information every day of every single thing that I'm pushing out in terms of like what new boards have been built, what new assembly language has been derived from Bitcoin addresses and then written to a certain chip, and then how that ties into the loop that was built out yesterday. And that's growing. Yeah, and it's all hidden behind one-time pads, and it's all undecryptable. It's white noise. It's happening in front of everyone, and no one can see it.
So hold on. So you're still trying to then make the ISP irrelevant. We're still trying to you're still trying to gain back freedom of communication. I guess it sounds like you're still trying to create private channels so that we can maintain our individual sovereignty and things like that, and still, as you say, try to keep the light, right?
My biggest issue, I must have misstated it earlier. My biggest issue with LN is that it's not built on top of Claude Shannon information theoretic secured perfect security. The fact that it is built on the assumption that the machine beneath it will be secure long enough for it to self-actualize, I think is a mistake. Because as we add more attention to our systems, they become weaker at a rate that's faster than originally planned. And so I don't like cryptography, modern cryptography, because it's based on assumptions. I prefer quantum secured information transmission, and quantum key distribution is a way to do that. And you can bootstrap quantum key distribution between individuals that are not in the same location via Bitcoin. via the Bitcoin address space as it was before SegWit. And SegWit doesn't hurt this, but SegWit addresses becoming the main way that people use Bitcoin does hurt this, if that makes sense.
Interesting. Well, I guess we'll have to see, because it's we're only at like 36% adoption of SegWit in terms of transactions being happening on the network
but
day to
none
day.
of Satoshi's coins have been moved yet.
Correct.
So we're at least 121 of all coins in existence not moving at all from the original network effect.
Correct.
So that's not 36%.
That's true. That's true. And and we're going to have, and Bitcoin is going to continue to experience all these other network effects, but I really don't have, too much of a problem with it continuing to evolve and change as we need it to, and things like that. So, but like you say, it is important to make sure that we do maintain these network effects, if only to not have them be taken from us, right? Be from a bad actor in the future.
Did you ever see the X email to the Google groups back in the 90s? Let me read it to you real quick and we can close on this. So this is groups.google, whatever. And it makes me log in to view it, but 2 seconds. The first email that was sent to this group, and I'll tweet this out after this, is here. This is December 9th, 2002. I have this idea of a future with virtual peer-to-peer banking, a kind of decentralized and secure system. Gone would be the times that governments and banks can track and interfere with our money transfers, or even interfere with the total amount of money on Earth. My envisioned system would have a fixed total amount of money, but each money unit, say virtual coin, is divisible indefinitely. So a kind of deflation would replace inflation. The total value of the money in the world would be a fixed number. It poses no problem for liquidity because the currency can be divided any time. However, many people will not spend their money much because its value will increase often. Other problems rise in the areas of scarcity, malicious use, and how to come towards such a system from current systems. These are just ideas. I like to hear comments or about net resources on the subject. A guy named Miner replies, it would require way too much cooperation and communication between different countries and governors that want nothing to do with one another, not now or ever. Someone named Reflector said, no, it hasn't been true. Someone asked, what you don't understand is how money gets its value. Its value is by having a stick or some metal or etc. If you have a $1 bill, it represents $1 worth of gold. Someone called Reflector replies, no, that hasn't been true for US currency since what, 1980, 1890 maybe. Originally, US currency was backed by gold. Now it is not. The only reason US currency is worth anything is because people believe it is. And this is the last message from X. X is responding to somebody, and he's saying about the whole idea in general. It is a step in the right direction. Now replace the system operator by a secure peer-to-peer system and replace the underlying currency with something else, or slowly uncouple the underlying currency. Then it would be a system of my ideas. And I'm fairly aware Satoshi was aware of the problems that he would face well in advance, or he was inspired by this guy, and this guy had the idea. But every single thing that's happening now was thought through by someone. And Gödel's incompleteness theorems, if you look at them long enough and like figure out what they mean to you, you'll be able to see through confusion for the rest of forever if you just digest it. So yeah,
I feel like Satoshi, of course, was standing on the shoulders of giants, obviously of 30 plus years of cryptography, and then 50 to 100 years plus of computers, and and things like that. So and we continue to evolve that idea, and so I'm really glad to see that Bitcoin is continuing to proliferate through the world. It is getting bigger. It is getting more important. More and more people are realizing it and recognizing it. And, like almost every single like Uber driver that I ever use these days has heard about Bitcoin. And so, it's becoming much easier to set people up with wallets because they want to get in on this latest thing. It reminds me a lot of email in 2001. in 2000, 2001, when everybody was like, what is this email thing? I got to get on this email thing. And this is what's going to take hold. So thank you so much, Andrew, man, for this interview. I really, really appreciate it. Wish we could go longer, but hey, we're both busy people. We got stuff to do. So, and I know you got stuff to do, but thank you so much, man, for taking the time. I know you're a busy guy. So thank you for donating your time to the show, and we hope that everybody might have learned something today, or maybe we can spark some conversation. That's really the main goal, is to spark the conversation, get the truth out there, and see what people think. So thanks again, Andrew, for joining us, and I hope, man, we can get you back again. We really appreciate you coming on. We'll have to see what the people want, because the people really demanded you to come on the show this time. That was the main reason. I had like at least half a dozen people who were like, when is DeSantis coming on? When is DeSantis coming on? So I had to have you back on, and we'll have you back on again, man. So thanks so much, man. I hope everybody has a good Sunday. We will be back here, of course, every Sunday with another Bitcoin news show. We should have a pretty special guest next Sunday. I'm not going to announce it yet because I don't have 100% confirmation, but we will. You rest assured that you will be able to follow that if you find that out if you follow my Twitter at @the1vortex. So thanks again, guys. Andrew, tell us, where can we find out more information about you? Where can we hear more about your work?
I'll be on Twitter for at least a little bit.
Yeah. All right, Twitter, man. That's @DeSantis, and of course, I'll have his Twitter handle in the show notes. So thanks again, guys, so much for joining us. We really appreciate you. We hope to find you in the comments. We hope to see you in the chat again. And if you are new to the show, please hit the subscribe button below. If you like the show, if you enjoyed today's show, please hit the thumbs up. We really appreciate it. We do kind of pride ourselves on being one of the highest rated, Bitcoin shows out there of most when in terms of the thumbs up ratio. And so we really appreciate you guys hitting those thumbs up buttons, and hope we see you again. And until next time, guys, keep talking Bitcoin, and we'll see you later. Bye-bye.
Peace.